So, if you've recently watched the first season of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, you probably remember that little bald boy following a very tall knight around. Yes, that kid, the one who keeps shaving his head so nobody realizes he's a prince. The boy called Aegon V Targaryen, or simply Egg. And here's the funny part. That cheerful little squire who carries armor and gets bossed around by Sir Duncan the Tall eventually becomes King of the Seven Kingdoms. Now, if that sounds surprising, it should, because Egg becoming king is a bit like being the fourth backup player on the bench, suddenly finding yourself captain of the team. Why? Because Egg was the fourth son of the fourth son of a king, which in royal succession terms basically means, don't worry about the throne, kid. It's never happening. Except in the wonderfully chaotic world of A Song of Ice and Fire, things almost never go according to plan. So today, let's take a deep dive into the strange, tragic, and occasionally ridiculous chain of events that somehow placed the Iron Throne beneath Egg. And trust me, this story has everything. Dead princes, mad princes, a man choking on a lamprey pie, and one Targaryen who quite literally drank wildfire because he thought it would turn him into a dragon. Yes, that actually happened. To understand how Egg became king, we need to start a generation earlier, with his grandfather, Daeron II Targaryen. Now, Daeron II was not your typical fiery Targaryen conqueror. He preferred diplomacy over dragons and actually managed something quite extraordinary. He peacefully brought dawn into the Seven Kingdoms, and he did it through marriage. Daeron married Maria Martell, a Dornish princess, sealing peace between two kingdoms that had been enemies for generations. Together, they had 4 sons. And like any good medieval drama, those 4 sons would eventually create one of the most chaotic succession stories in Westerosi history. The eldest was Baelor Breakspear, and Baelor was exactly the kind of prince people actually want as king. He was tall, broad-shouldered, disciplined, and wise. His dark hair came from his Dornish mother, and by his late 30s, it was already streaked with grey. His nose had been broken twice, giving him the rugged look of a seasoned warrior. But despite dressing simply, Baelor carried an unmistakable sense of authority. People trusted him. Even hardened knights, like Sir Arlan of Pennytree, spoke highly of him. Baelor eventually became Hand of the King and Protector of the Realm, effectively running the kingdom for his father. In short, Baelor Breakspear was the perfect heir, which of course means he was doomed. During the Great Tourney at Ashford Meadow, things took a tragic turn. In the chaos of a trial of 7, Baelor received a terrible blow to the head. The mace that struck him was wielded by none other than his own brother, Maekar I Targaryen. It was an accident, but the damage was done. Baelor died soon after in the arms of Duncan the Tall. His body was later cremated at Ashford, following the funeral traditions of House Targaryen. And just like that, the best possible king Westeros could have had was gone. But Baelor did leave behind 2 sons. The eldest was Valar Targaryen. Valar looked a lot like his father, though he was slimmer and more conventionally handsome. His brown hair even had a striking streak of silver gold running through it. For a while, it looked like the line of succession was safe. Valar would rule one day, except fate had other plans. In 209 AC, a terrible plague known as the Great Spring Sickness swept across the realm. And it didn't just take common folk. It killed King Daeron II, Prince Valar, and Valar's younger brother, Mataris Targaryen, all gone, just like that. And suddenly, the line of succession started looking a little thin. Next in line was Daeron II's second son, Aerys I Targaryen. Now Aerys was not exactly an ideal king. He was tall, thin, stooped, and permanently buried in books. His eyes were often red from too much reading. In fact, people joked that Aerys would sooner bring a book to bed than his own wife. And considering he was married to Aelina Penrose, that became a bit of a problem, because Aerys never produced any children, which meant the succession kept shifting, again and again. His brother, Rhaegal Targaryen, briefly became heir. Rhaegal was known as a sweet but fragile man, possibly touched by madness. Rumor claimed he once danced naked through the halls of the Red Keep, but Rhaegal died in 215 AC, and not in battle, not in a grand tragedy. No, he choked on a lamprey pie. By this point, the Iron Throne must have felt like it had been cursed. The next heir was Rhaegal's son, Aelor Targaryen, but he died in a strange accident involving his twin sister and wife, Aelora Targaryen. Aelora herself later became heir, but grief drove her to suicide, and now the crown finally passed to the last surviving brother, the man who had accidentally killed Baelor years earlier, Prince Maekar. When Aerys I died in 221 AC, Maekar finally became king. And this is where our story gets interesting, because Maekar had several sons, and Egg was the fourth of them, meaning the throne was still very, very far away, or so everyone thought. So when Maekar I Targaryen finally became king in 221 AC, the Iron Throne must have thought its bad luck was finally over. After all, Maekar had what every dynasty desperately needs. He had sons, several of them, which meant the succession should finally be safe, stable, predictable. Of course, if you know anything about the history of House Targaryen, you already know what comes next. Absolutely none of that happened. Maekar had married Diana Dane, and together they had 6 children. But the ones that matter for our story are his 4 sons: Daeron Targaryen, Aerion Targaryen, Aemon Targaryen, and finally, the youngest boy, the little bald kid from a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, Aegon V Targaryen, Egg. Now normally, when a king has 4 sons, the youngest one can relax. His biggest responsibility is usually not embarrassing the family name too badly. But the Targaryens had a habit of turning succession into something that looked less like a family tree and more like a game of elimination. Let's start with the eldest son. The firstborn was Prince Daeron, and unfortunately for Maekar, Daeron was, well, not exactly Prince of the Year material. He was thin, pale, and sickly looking, with sandy brown hair and a blonde beard. Not particularly impressive by warrior standards, but his real problem wasn't his appearance. It was his habits. Daeron had a fondness for wine. Actually, let's be honest, he had a fondness for a lot of wine. So much so that people began calling him Daeron the Drunken. Now, drunken princes are not ideal, but historically speaking, Westeros has survived worse. Unfortunately, Daeron also had terrible luck. At some point, he caught a pox from a prostitute and died before his father Maekar, which immediately removed the first son from the line of succession. And just like that, one branch of the royal family tree was gone. Next came the second son, and if Daeron was disappointing, Aerion was terrifying. Prince Aerion Targaryen was everything a classic Targaryen prince looked like. Beautiful, silver gold hair, deep violet eyes, pale skin. The kind of man who looked like he had just stepped out of a Valyrian legend. Unfortunately, his personality also stepped straight out of a nightmare. Aerion was cruel, arrogant, and completely convinced that being a Targaryen made him something more than human. He even gave himself a nickname, Bright Flame, which should probably have been the first warning sign. Now Aegon eventually married his cousin, Daenerys Targaryen, and in 232 AC, they had a son. And because this family has a long tradition of picking extremely ominous names, the boy was named Maegor Targaryen. Yes, that Maegor. Named after Maegor I Targaryen, one of the most infamous kings in Targaryen history. So naturally, everyone was already a little nervous about this child. But the truly bizarre moment came that same year. Aegon got drunk, which for this family is already a bad start. Then he drank a cup of wildfire. Yes, wildfire. The same substance that explodes like magical napalm. Why did he do this? Because Aegon genuinely believed it would transform him into a dragon. Instead, he died screaming. And just like that, the second son of Maekar was gone too. At this point, the Iron Throne probably started sweating. Now, we move to the third son. And here, the story takes a very different turn. Because Aemon Targaryen was nothing like his brothers. Aemon was quiet, thoughtful, and extremely intelligent. Instead of chasing glory with a sword, he spent his time reading books. In fact, he loved books so much that he eventually went to the Citadel in Old Town to become a Maester. Maesters take vows. They renounce titles, lands, inheritance, and family claims. So even though Aemon was technically next in line after his older brothers died, he had already stepped out of the game, which finally brings us to the youngest son, the boy nobody expected to rule, Aegon V Targaryen. In 233 AC, King Maekar I Targaryen died during the peak uprising while storming the castle of Starpike. A rock hurled from the battlements crushed his helm and killed him. The Great Council of 233 AC decided who would sit on the Iron Throne. And against all odds, the boy who once polished Duncan the Tall's armor would become King Aegon V.